The forgotten self. The person you were before the world told you who to be. Prologue. The stranger in the mirror. There was nothing unusual about the morning. The light came through the bathroom window in a pale, ordinary way. Water moved through the pipes behind the wall. Somewhere outside, a truck groaned at an intersection. A phone on the counter vibrated once, then became still. The person standing before the mirror had seen this face thousands of times. They knew the small line beside the mouth that had appeared a few years ago. They knew the slight difference between the left eye and the right. They knew which angle photographs favored, which expression looked confident, which one seemed tired. They knew their age, their profession, their address, their history. They knew the names of old lovers, childhood friends, teachers, employers, enemies, and people they still wanted to impress. They knew what they had accomplished. They knew what they regretted. They knew which stories to tell at dinner. They knew how to answer the question, "What do you do?" But that morning, for reasons they could not explain, none of these answers felt sufficient. The face in the mirror seemed familiar and impossibly distant. A thought appeared. Not dramatically, not like thunder, more like a door opening somewhere in a house that had been silent for years. I know everything about my life. Then another thought came, but I do not know who is living it. The person stared at the reflection. For a moment, the usual machinery of identity stopped. There was no job, no reputation, no past, no future, no role to perform. There was only a living being looking into glass, and beneath the face, beneath the name, beneath all the descriptions accumulated through decades, something wordless seemed to be looking back. It was not frightening at first. Then it was, because if the person in the mirror was not merely the sum of all those descriptions, then who were they? And if the descriptions had been learned, inherited, rewarded, corrected, praised, punished, and repeated until they felt natural, what had existed before them? The question followed them from the bathroom. It followed them into the kitchen, into traffic, into meetings, into conversations in which they heard themselves saying things they had said many times before. I've always been like that. That's just who I am. I could never do something like that. My family expects me to. People like me don't. I need to. I should. The phrases sounded different now, not false exactly, but borrowed, as though an invisible hand had written a script long ago and the actor had forgotten there was a script at all. That evening, standing again before the mirror, the person tried an experiment. They said their name aloud. The name felt intimate, but also strange. They imagined removing it, then their profession, then their nationality, then their education, their successes, their failures, their relationships, their political beliefs, their spiritual beliefs, their personality, their memories, their ambitions, their wounds. One by one, they imagined setting these things on the floor like garments. Soon there was almost nothing left to say. And yet they had not disappeared. Something remained. Something was still aware, still breathing, still looking. The person leaned closer to the mirror. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, they were not asking, "What should I become?" They were asking something far more dangerous. What have I mistaken for myself? And behind that question waited another, one that could not be answered quickly, one that could change a life if allowed to remain open. Who remains when everything you learn to call me becomes silent? Chapter 1. The first name you were given, before you knew your name, you were alive. This simple fact is easy to overlook. There was a time when the sound that now seems to represent you meant nothing to you. Adults spoke it over your body. They wrote it on documents. They used it to call you across rooms. Eventually, through repetition, you learned to turn your head. The sound became connected to your face, then to your possessions, your behavior, your victories, your mistakes. That is yours. You did that. You are such a good child. Why are you always so difficult? Little by little, a center formed. A story began gathering around the name. This is not a mistake. Human beings need identity. Psychologically and socially, identity helps us move through a world of relationships, expectations, memory, and responsibility. A functioning sense of self allows a child to understand boundaries, make choices, remember experiences, and participate in a community. The problem is not that an identity forms. The mystery begins when we forget that it formed, when something constructed becomes something unquestionable, When a useful map begins to be mistaken for the entire country, you were given far more than a name. Before you were old enough to examine the world was already explaining itself to you. Some things were admirable, some shameful, some realistic, some impossible. Some people were like us, others were not. Certain careers were respectable, certain emotions were embarrassing, certain dreams were childish, certain kinds of love were acceptable, certain ways of speaking sounded educated, certain clothes meant success, certain neighborhoods meant you had made it, certain failures meant something about your worth. You absorb much of this before you possess the mental distance to question it. A child does not enter a family as a detached philosopher. A child enters as a creature of dependence. Belonging is not an abstract preference to a young human being. It is deeply connected to survival. So the child becomes an exquisite reader of faces, a raised eyebrow, a disappointed sigh, a warm smile, an awkward silence, a sudden withdrawal of affection. These things teach, sometimes more powerfully than words. The child begins to notice what brings closeness and what creates distance. Perhaps enthusiasm is welcomed, but anger is not. Perhaps achievement creates celebration. Perhaps obedience brings peace. Perhaps being funny prevents tension. Perhaps being invisible prevents conflict. Perhaps caring for everyone else earns affection. Perhaps perfection delays criticism. Perhaps success becomes the language in which love is most easily recognized. And without consciously deciding to do so, the child adapts. This adaptation is often intelligent, sometimes brilliant. A sensitive child in a volatile household may become extraordinarily good at sensing moods. A child praised almost exclusively for achievement may become disciplined and ambitious. A child who feels unseen may become entertaining. A child surrounded by anxiety may become extremely responsible. These qualities can later look like personality, and sometimes they are. But personality and adaptation can become so intertwined that separating them feels impossible. Imagine a girl named Anna. At 6, Anna paints strange cities filled with purple trees and golden rivers. She sings loudly when she thinks no one is listening. She asks questions at dinner that make adults laugh. At 8, a teacher tells her she is too much. At 9, another child mocks her drawings. At 10, she notices that her father becomes especially proud when she receives high grades. At 11, she discovers that being prepared earns approval. At 13, she learns that saying the wrong thing can lead to exclusion. By 16, Anna is impressive, organized, polite, high-achieving, dependable. She has not been forced into a prison. No villain designed her life. Most of the people around her love her. Yet something has happened. The strange cities disappear. The singing becomes private. The questions become safer. The desire to be approved of becomes so deeply woven into her choices that she no longer experiences it as a desire. She experiences it as herself. I'm just a very driven person. Perhaps she is. But what is the difference between a genuine desire and a desire shaped by the fear of losing belonging? That question is not easily answered. Human beings are not onions with a pure, untouched personality hidden at the exact center. We are relational beings. We are influenced from the beginning. Biology, temperament, culture, language, attachment, chance, memory, and environment all participate in who we become. There may be no historically untouched version of you waiting intact beneath every social influence, but there can still be something forgotten. Not necessarily an original personality frozen in childhood. Something more fundamental. A way of being before constant self-monitoring. A directness of experience. A capacity to feel before translating feeling into reputation. A curiosity that does not first ask whether curiosity is productive. A desire that has not yet learned to justify itself. A sorrow that does not apologize. A joy that does not need to be photographed. A presence that is not constantly observing itself through the imagined eyes of others. This is the first threshold. The forgotten self is not simply the child you used to be. Childhood itself contains fear, conditioning, confusion, and dependency. The forgotten self is closer to the living intelligence beneath the performance. The part of you capable of noticing the performance. The part that sometimes whispers, I do not know why I keep doing this. Or I got what I wanted. Why does it feel empty? Or everyone thinks I'm doing well. Why do I feel like I'm disappearing? Those whispers are easily dismissed. Modern life offers endless ways to silence them. Work harder, scroll longer, buy something, improve something, optimize something, set another goal, find another audience, become more desirable, become more certain, become more productive. But the whisper returns, because the person you have become may be highly skilled at navigating the world while still being a stranger to the one who is navigating it. And so the first work is not to invent a new identity. It is to begin noticing the old one. Listen to the phrases you use without thinking. I have to. I could never. My parents would hate that. That would look ridiculous. What would people think? I'm not the kind of person who each phrase may contain a truth, or it may contain an old instruction. You do not need to rebel against every instruction. Rebellion can become another form of captivity. A person who spends an entire life doing the opposite of what their parents wanted is still allowing the parents to define the direction. Freedom is quieter. It asks, is this still true? That question creates space, and in that space, something begins to breathe. Chapter 2. The House of Invisible Rules. Every family has laws that were never written. Some families speak openly about their values. Others communicate them through silence, reward, shame, humor, tension, and repetition. Be strong. Do not embarrass us. Family comes first. Never depend on anyone. Money is dangerous. Money is everything. Success is safety. Artists suffer. Men do not cry. Women should keep the peace. We do not talk about that. Forgive everything. Forget nothing. Never trust outsiders. Marriage is forever. Marriage ruins people. Education is the only path. People with education think they are better than us. Do not become arrogant. Do not become ordinary. The rules may contradict one another. Human beings often inherit contradictions. A father may tell his son to be independent and then punish him whenever he disagrees. A mother may tell her daughter to be confident while subtly rewarding compliance. A family may praise humility while competing fiercely over status. A household may speak constantly of love, yet avoid every vulnerable conversation. Children do not learn only from what families claim to believe. They learn from what families repeatedly do. This creates an inheritance more subtle than money or property, an inheritance of expectation. Suppose a boy grows up in a family where sacrifice is sacred. His grandfather worked until his body failed. His father never took vacations. His mother takes pride in needing almost nothing. When the boy becomes a man, rest makes him uneasy. He may intellectually believe that rest is healthy. He may even tell others to slow down. But when he sits alone on a quiet afternoon, guilt appears. Nothing externally threatens him. No one is criticizing him. Yet an invisible tribunal has assembled inside his mind. You should be doing something. The voice sounds like his own. That is what makes inherited expectations powerful. Eventually, the guard no longer needs to stand outside the prison. The prisoner learns the guard's voice. This does not mean family influence is inherently oppressive. Families also transmit courage, generosity, humor, resilience, craft, language, memory, faith, ritual, and love. Many of the most beautiful parts of us are inherited. The aim is not to condemn inheritance. It is to become conscious of it. Because an unconscious inheritance becomes fate. A conscious inheritance becomes a choice. You can keep what nourishes life. You can question what diminishes it. But questioning inherited identity often produces guilt. This is why many people remain trapped long after they recognize the trap. A woman may realize that the career chosen for her is slowly exhausting her. Yet changing direction feels like betrayal. A man may see that he does not share his family's beliefs. Yet speaking honestly feels like abandonment. Someone may want a life without marriage, children, prestige, religion, wealth, or geographic stability, while coming from a family where those things form the sacred architecture of adulthood. To choose differently can feel like saying, your life was wrong. But that does not have to be the message. A child can honor the journey of the parent without repeating it. Gratitude is not imitation. Love is not obedience. Understanding someone's sacrifices does not require turning those sacrifices into your destiny. This distinction can take years to learn. There is a quiet tragedy that sometimes passes through generations. One person abandons a dream in order to survive. The next generation inherits survival as a moral law. The grandchild, born into safer conditions, still feels forbidden to dream. The original danger is gone. The command remains. This is how ghosts move through families, not supernatural ghosts, psychological ones, Unfinished fears, unspoken grief, old humiliations, dreams that were never mourned. Stories repeated until they become identity. Our family has always struggled. People like us have to work twice as hard. We never get lucky. We are survivors. Even empowering stories can become cages if a person is not allowed to become anything beyond them. There is dignity in surviving. But what happens when survival is no longer the only task? Who are you when the emergency ends? Some people do not know. Peace can feel more threatening than struggle when struggle has become identity. They unconsciously create new battles, new deadlines, new crises, new impossible standards. Not because they love suffering, because the nervous system recognizes the familiar more easily than it recognizes freedom. Psychological research on attachment, learning, stress, and family systems offers many ways of understanding how early environments influence later patterns. No single theory explains a human life completely, yet one principle appears again and again. What is repeatedly experienced can become expected, and what is expected can shape perception and behavior. You begin seeing through old patterns when you become curious about the rules beneath your reactions. Not, what is wrong with me? But what rule am I obeying? When you cannot rest, what do I believe rest means? When you cannot say no, what do I imagine will happen if someone is disappointed in me? When success never feels sufficient, whose standard am I trying to satisfy? When you stay small, who once needed me to remain small? When you fear becoming visible, what did visibility once cost? These questions are not accusations. They are lamps. You carry them through the hidden rooms of the inner house. Some rooms contain tenderness. You discover how much your parents feared because they loved you. You see how their restrictions were sometimes clumsy forms of protection. You understand that they too inherited invisible laws. And behind them stood other frightened human beings. And behind those, others. Generation after generation, people handing one another maps drawn for territories that no longer exist. At some point, someone must look at the map and then look at the land. Perhaps that person is you. There may come a moment when you realize that becoming yourself will disappoint someone. This is unavoidable. Every authentic life closes doors. Every true choice excludes alternatives. You cannot live according to every expectation at once. If you spend your life preventing disappointment, you may eventually discover that the person most deeply disappointed is the one whose life was never lived. There is no need for cruelty. There is no need for dramatic rejection. Sometimes freedom begins invisibly, a private sentence. I am allowed to examine what I inherited. Another. Love does not require unconscious obedience. Then perhaps the most difficult. Their fear does not have to become my future. The house of invisible rules does not collapse at once, but a window opens, and through it comes air from a life you have not yet met. Chapter 3. The Mask That Learned to Breathe. The word persona originally referred to a mask associated with theatrical performance in the ancient world. Centuries later, the psychiatrist Carl Jung used the term in his psychological framework to describe the social face a person presents to the world. You do not need to accept Jung's broader theories to recognize the experience. You have a face for strangers, a face for work, a face for family, a face for people whose approval matters, a face for someone you love, perhaps even a face for yourself. This is not necessarily deception. Human behavior naturally changes across contexts. You do not speak to a child exactly as you speak to a lawyer. You do not behave at a funeral exactly as you behave alone in your kitchen. Adaptability is part of social intelligence. The problem appears when the mask ceases to be something you wear and becomes something you cannot remove. Imagine a man named David. Everyone describes David the same way: reliable, calm, capable. He solves problems. He rarely complains. His coworkers call him when projects go wrong. His siblings call him when family conflict erupts. His partner tells friends with admiration, nothing rattles him. This identity has rewards. People trust him. He is respected. He is needed. Then one evening, his father dies. At the hospital, David organizes everything. He speaks with the doctor. He calls relatives. He handles paperwork. At the funeral, he supports his mother. Weeks pass. People tell him how strong he is. But something begins happening at night. He cannot sleep. He finds himself standing in the kitchen at 2 a.m, not thinking anything in particular. His body feels heavy. He becomes irritated by small noises. One afternoon, alone in his car, he begins to cry. The crying terrifies him more than the grief. Because David is not merely experiencing sadness, he is violating an identity. I am the strong one. This is how masks become prisons. The role begins as a strategy. Then the strategy receives social reward. Then the reward becomes identity. Then any emotion that threatens the identity feels dangerous. The funny person may not know how to be taken seriously. The caretaker may not know how to receive care. The achiever may not know how to fail. The rebel may not know how to cooperate. The spiritual person may not know how to admit envy. The rational person may not know how to honor intuition. The independent person may not know how to need someone. The kind person may become terrified of anger. The confident person may have nowhere to place uncertainty. The mask is rarely completely false. David really is capable. The caretaker really is compassionate. The achiever may genuinely love excellence. The danger lies in the word only. I am only strong, only useful, only successful, only good, only independent, only desirable when I perform this function. Identity becomes rigid when complexity feels unsafe, and then life eventually creates a situation the mask cannot solve. Loss, illness, rejection, failure, aging, love, parenthood, exhaustion, death. These experiences have a way of entering through the cracks. They reveal parts of us that were never included in the official biography. Many people experience such moments as breakdowns. Sometimes they are. Mental health struggles deserve care and should not be romanticized as automatically transformative. But some crises also expose the limits of an old identity. The person says, I don't feel like myself anymore. The sentence may mean something is seriously wrong and requires support. It may also contain a strange possibility. Which self? The productive self? The pleasing self? The invulnerable self? The self who knew exactly where life was going? Perhaps the feeling of not being yourself is sometimes the feeling of no longer being able to maintain the version of yourself that the past demanded. This can be terrifying because the old identity, however restrictive, was familiar. It offered coordinates. Without it, you may feel undefined. People often rush to fill this emptiness. A new career, a new relationship, a new ideology, a new spiritual identity, a dramatic reinvention. Sometimes change is necessary. But if every lost mask is immediately replaced by another, the deeper question remains untouched. There is a particular kind of courage required to stay undefined for a while, to say, I do not know who I am without this, and not immediately solve the problem. The mind wants nouns: executive, mother, artist, survivor, introvert, leader, empath, entrepreneur, believer, skeptic. Labels can be useful. They can help us communicate and find community, but no label can contain a living human being. The moment a label becomes sacred, experience begins to bend around it. You notice evidence that confirms the identity. You ignore evidence that complicates it. I'm an introvert, so I don't do that. I'm not creative. I'm terrible with money. I've always been anxious. I'm the responsible one. I'm not relationship material. What would happen if some of these statements became softer? Not false, just unfinished. I have often behaved this way. I learned to see myself this way. This has been true in many situations. Perhaps there is more. That final sentence is a doorway. Perhaps there is more. The forgotten self does not demand that you destroy every mask. You need roles. The world requires them. Someone must be the doctor during the surgery. Someone must be the parent when the child needs protection. Someone must be the manager during the meeting. Roles become beautiful when worn consciously. Then you can put them down. You can leave the office without carrying the office inside your skull. You can be competent without turning competence into your right to exist. You can care for others without making usefulness the price of love. You can succeed without demanding that success tell you who you are. There is an old spiritual intuition found in various traditions, expressed in different language. What we ordinarily call the self may not be the deepest layer of our being. Different traditions interpret this differently. Some speak of soul, some of pure awareness, some of emptiness, some of divine presence, some of the witness. Some reject metaphysical language altogether and simply observe that thoughts, emotions, and identities can be noticed, and therefore may not exhaust the mystery of the one noticing them. You do not need to adopt any spiritual doctrine to conduct a simple experiment. Sit somewhere quiet. Notice a thought. Perhaps I am failing. Now notice that the thought is being observed. Then an emotion. Fear. Notice that fear too is being known. Then a role. Mother, employee, partner. Notice that the role can be imagined and examined. There is something strange here. Whatever you can observe appears, at least in experience, as an object of awareness. A thought appears. A memory appears. A role appears. A sensation appears. Even the image you carry of yourself appears. Then what is aware of all this appearing? Do not answer too quickly. The mind loves to convert mystery into terminology. Stay with the question. A mask becomes dangerous when it forgets that there is a face beneath it, and perhaps the face beneath it is itself another mask. How deep does this go? That is where the journey truly begins. Chapter 4. The courtroom. Inside the mind. Somewhere inside many human beings is a courtroom. The judge is invisible. The audience is imagined. The trial never ends. You enter a room and immediately know how you are being perceived, or think you know. Your clothes are being evaluated. Your body is being evaluated. Your intelligence, your success, your desirability, your confidence, your awkwardness, your social value. You say something, and part of your mind continues listening after the sentence is finished. Was that stupid? You post something online and check for reactions. You tell a story and watch faces. You make a choice and imagine how you will explain it later. Much of this happens automatically. Humans are intensely social creatures. Sensitivity to belonging, status, reputation, and exclusion has deep evolutionary and developmental roots. Being concerned about how others perceive us is not evidence of vanity. In moderation, it is part of social life. But there is a difference between awareness of others and captivity to an imagined audience. The imagined audience can follow you even when no one is present. It can sit beside you while you choose clothes, stand behind you while you look at your body, attend your private dreams, review your career, judge your marriage, score your vacation, evaluate whether you are aging correctly, ask whether your grief is attractive, ask whether your joy is impressive. It is possible to spend an entire life performing for people who are not in the room. This performance becomes especially powerful when approval was once linked to emotional safety. A child who receives warmth unpredictably may become highly attentive to cues of acceptance. A teenager excluded by peers may learn to monitor every social detail. Someone who experienced humiliation may work relentlessly to prevent its return. Over time, approval becomes more than pleasure. It becomes relief. And disapproval becomes more than disagreement. It feels like danger. Then the adult says, "I don't care what anyone thinks," but spends hours constructing an image designed to prove exactly that. Indifference can itself become a performance. The true opposite of approval seeking is not defiance. It is freedom. Freedom can hear praise without becoming intoxicated. Freedom can hear criticism without automatically collapsing. Freedom can ask whether feedback is useful without turning feedback into identity. This sounds simple. It is not. Imagine that you have spent 20 years building a life people admire. You have the respected profession, the disciplined body, the tasteful home, the carefully maintained social presence. People describe you as successful. Then one quiet afternoon, a question arises. Would I have chosen any of this if no one could see me? You may hate the question because it threatens the architecture. Perhaps the answer is yes. Perhaps you genuinely love your work. Perhaps the house delights you. Perhaps the ambition is authentic. Then nothing needs to be destroyed. But perhaps the answer is complicated. Perhaps some choices were made less from desire than from visibility. You wanted what could be recognized, what could be measured, what could be envied, what could be explained. Certain forms of success are attractive partly because they make identity legible. People understand titles, numbers, awards, possessions, followers, prestige. They do not always understand a quiet life, an unconventional calling, a season of uncertainty, a choice that produces peace but no status, an invisible form of devotion, a slower rhythm, a decision to stop climbing. The world finds visible ambition easier to interpret than invisible contentment. And this creates a peculiar temptation, to want a life that looks meaningful rather than a life that feels alive. There was once, in an imaginary kingdom, a sculptor who became famous for creating statues of extraordinary beauty. People traveled for days to see them. Kings bought them. Poets praised them. The The sculptor became wealthy, yet each night after his assistants left, he went into a locked room beneath his workshop. There he shaped small figures from rough clay. No one saw them, no one bought them. They were imperfect. Some were strange, some cracked in the kiln, yet these figures were the only things he loved making. One day his apprentice discovered the room. "Master," the apprentice said, "why do you hide your best work?" The sculptor laughed. "These are not my best." "Then why do you make them?" The sculptor looked around the room. "Because these are the only things I make before I remember who I am supposed to be." There are things you do before you remember who you are supposed to be. Notice them. There are ways you laugh with certain people, ways you move when alone, subjects that awaken you, books you read when no one will be impressed by them, questions you return to, places where time loses its usual weight. There are also desires that disappear the moment you imagine explaining them. Those deserve attention. Not every hidden desire should be followed. Some desires are impulsive, destructive, unrealistic, or transient. Authenticity is not the worship of impulse, but a desire should at least be heard before it is judged. Otherwise, the courtroom has already reached its verdict. Approval becomes especially dangerous when it merges with morality. You begin assuming that disappointing someone means you have harmed them. These are not the same. You can disappoint a parent by choosing a different career. You can disappoint a friend by setting a boundary. You can disappoint an employer by refusing unreasonable demands. You can disappoint a social group by changing your beliefs. Disappointment is an emotion. It is not always evidence of wrongdoing. This distinction can feel revolutionary to someone trained to maintain harmony at all costs. Many lives are governed by an unconscious equation. If they are unhappy with me, I must have done something wrong. But adulthood requires the ability to tolerate being misunderstood. Without that capacity, identity remains democratic. Everyone gets a vote: your relatives, your coworkers, your former classmates, strangers online, people who do not know you, people who dislike you, people whose lives you would never want. Everyone gets a vote, except the quietest person in the room, you. At some point, the internal courtroom must close. Not because judgment disappears. People will judge you, sometimes accurately, sometimes unfairly. You will also continue judging yourself. The mind produces evaluation as naturally as the body produces heat. But you can stop treating every verdict as law. You can hear the gavel and remain seated. You can ask, whose court is this? And sometimes, astonishingly, you will discover that there is no judge, only an old recording, playing in an empty room. Chapter 5. The mirror made of other people. There's a mirror that hangs nowhere and follows you everywhere. It is made of other people. You look into it when you compare your body, your income, your relationship, your house, your intelligence, your children, your progress, your spiritual growth, your happiness, your suffering. You are having a perfectly good morning until you see someone else's life. Then your life becomes insufficient. A friend announces an engagement. A colleague receives a promotion. Someone younger becomes successful. Someone older looks younger. Someone travels somewhere beautiful. Someone buys a house. Someone publishes a book. Someone appears peaceful. Suddenly, you have fallen behind in a race you were not aware you had entered. Comparison is ancient. Social media did not invent it. Humans have always noticed relative status and belonging, but modern technologies can multiply the number of lives available for comparison beyond anything most earlier societies experienced. You can compare your private Tuesday afternoon to the curated high point of a stranger living thousands of miles away. And because the nervous system responds to images faster than the philosophical mind analyzes them, the comparison can enter before you consciously remember. This is selected. This is framed. I do not know the full life behind this image. The deeper problem, however, is not the technology. It is the question hidden beneath comparison. Am I enough? Enough for what? This is rarely defined. Enough to deserve love? Enough to belong? Enough to justify existence? Enough to prove that the years have not been wasted? The measuring system is unstable because the category is unclear. You can always find someone richer, more beautiful, more disciplined, more talented, more enlightened, more wounded, more admired. Even suffering becomes competitive. The ego can build identity from inferiority just as easily as superiority. I am behind everyone. I am the one who never gets chosen. I have suffered more. I am ordinary. These statements may contain real pain, but repeated long enough, pain becomes biography. Biography becomes identity. Identity begins protecting itself. Then change becomes strangely threatening. If you have defined yourself as the overlooked one, what happens when someone sees you? If you have defined yourself as unsuccessful, what happens when an opportunity appears? People sometimes sabotage what they consciously want because success threatens an unconscious identity. The old self says, "This is not who we are." Comparison strengthens identity by providing contrast. I am smarter than them, less attractive than her, more spiritual than him, less successful than my brother, more authentic than those people. The self is constantly outlined against others. Without comparison, some identities begin to blur. This can feel disorienting. Consider how many preferences are partly social. Would you want the same car if no one saw it? Would you want the same body if no one praised it? Would you want the same wedding if no photographs existed? Would you want the same career if the title could never be mentioned? Again, the goal is not to shame desire. Beautiful things can be genuinely enjoyed. Achievement can be deeply satisfying. Public recognition can help meaningful work reach others. The question is not whether something is visible. The question is whether visibility has become the source of value. There is a difference between loving the music and loving the applause. Both can exist together, but only one will remain when the room is empty. Imagine two musicians. The first performs before 10,000 people. The second plays alone beside an open window. Which is more authentic? There is not enough information. The first may be utterly absorbed in music. The second may be fantasizing about fame. Circumstances do not reveal motive. Attention does. Why are you doing what you are doing while you are doing it? Can you feel the activity itself? Or are you already standing outside yourself, imagining how the activity will look? This is one of the strangest features of self-consciousness. We can become spectators of our own lives. At dinner, we photograph the food before tasting it. During travel, we imagine how the place will appear in a post. During an accomplishment, we imagine announcing it. During grief, we wonder how grief should look. The witnessing mind is not inherently problematic. Self-reflection is one of our great capacities. But when the imagined audience becomes constant, the direct texture of living can grow thin. The sunset becomes content. The relationship becomes evidence. The home becomes status. The body becomes a project. The self becomes a brand. Then the forgotten self begins starving. Because it does not live in the image. It lives in contact. The warmth of a cup. The smell of rain. The way your friend's face changes before laughter. The ache behind the ribs when you finally admit you are lonely. The quiet pleasure of making something no one may ever see. These things have almost no value to the comparing mind because they cannot be ranked. That is precisely why they matter. Anything that can be ranked eventually creates winners and losers. But some dimensions of life refuse ranking. There is no world record for listening deeply to your father before he dies. No universally accepted score for a meaningful afternoon. No ranking system for the moment you stop pretending in front of someone you love. No trophy for forgiving yourself. No medal for noticing that you are alive. Comparison cannot enter certain sacred territories. It does not know what to do there. This is why simplicity can feel like rebellion. To enjoy something without displaying it. To become good at something without turning it into status. To love someone without using the relationship as proof. To rest without earning it. To possess something beautiful without needing anyone to envy it. These acts quietly loosen the mirror made of others. The reflection begins to fade. At first you may panic. If no one else tells you what counts as beautiful, successful, respectable, or enough, how will you know? Perhaps you will not. Perhaps that uncertainty is the beginning of adulthood. Not the adulthood defined by age. The adulthood of consciousness. The moment you stop asking the crowd for permission to experience your own life. Chapter 6. The Golden Ladder. Ambition is one of the brightest masks because it often resembles purpose. It gives mornings direction. It organizes sacrifice. It creates motion. It can build cities, discover medicines, compose symphonies, start businesses, raise families from poverty, and transform private imagination into something real. There is nothing inherently false about ambition. The question is what stands behind it. Desire, love, curiosity, fear, shame, revenge, a need to prove something, often several at once. There is an old fantasy hidden in many ambitious lives. When I reach the next level, something inside me will finally become quiet. The salary, the degree, the house, the audience, the body, the title, the relationship, the recognition, the number in the bank account. The fantasy is not merely that these things will bring pleasure. They may. The deeper fantasy is that achievement will settle the question of self. Then I will know that I matter. But an achievement can answer only the question it actually answers. A degree can tell you that you completed a course of study. It cannot tell you whether your existence is justified. Money can offer choices, comfort, security, and power. It cannot settle the metaphysical value of a human being. Fame can reveal that many people know your name. It cannot prove that anyone truly knows you. Beauty can attract attention. It cannot guarantee intimacy. Productivity can produce results. It cannot make you worthy of rest. When external achievements are secretly assigned internal jobs they cannot perform, success becomes disappointing. Not because success is meaningless, because it was asked to do the impossible. This explains a mystery that surprises many people. They reach the goal and feel joy, then relief, then, sooner than expected, the old hunger returns. Psychologists sometimes describe related processes through concepts such as adaptation. Changes that initially produce strong emotional responses can become familiar over time. The new salary becomes your salary. The new house becomes home. The new title becomes what appears beneath your name. The extraordinary becomes normal. Then the mind moves the horizon. Perhaps the next achievement will be enough, and the ladder rises. There is a parable about a traveler who came upon a golden ladder standing in a field. Its top disappeared into the clouds. At the bottom, a sign read, "Everything you have ever wanted is above." The traveler began climbing. After an hour, his hands hurt. After a day, his legs shook. But each time he considered stopping, he looked up and imagined the treasure. Years passed. The traveler became famous among the people below. Children pointed upward. "There he is," they said. The great climber. This gave him new strength. He climbed until his hair turned gray. One morning his hand reached into the clouds and touched the final rung. With trembling joy he pulled himself above the mist. There was nothing there, only open sky. Then he noticed something carved into the top rung. "What were you hoping to find?" The traveler began to laugh, then cry. Because after all those years, he could not remember. How many ladders begin with a forgotten question? I need to be successful. Why? So I can have freedom. How much freedom? Enough that I can finally live the way I want. How do you want to live? Silence. The ladder has replaced the destination. This can happen because measurable progress is psychologically comforting. Numbers provide certainty, income, weight, followers, sales, grades, promotions, hours worked, distance traveled, years married, accomplishments listed. A living soul, if you prefer spiritual language, cannot be reduced to metrics. Neither can a psychologically rich human life. So we often measure what is easier to measure and gradually mistake measurement for meaning. A person may optimize everything and feel nothing. Wake at 5, exercise, track food, read, work, network, improve, invest, repeat. There is nothing wrong with discipline. Discipline can be a form of love, but it can also become a sophisticated strategy for never asking why one is running. There is an ambition born from fear. I must become someone so that I will not be nobody. And there is an ambition born from fullness. Something wants to be made through my life. Externally, they can look similar. Both people work late, both practice, both sacrifice, both strive. But the inner atmosphere differs. Fear-driven ambition says, if I fail, I disappear. Fullness-driven ambition says, I want to discover what this can become. One contracts, the other creates. One uses the future to escape the present self. The other allows the present self to participate in a future. Most of us move between both. No one is perfectly pure. A writer may love writing and crave praise. A doctor may serve others and seek status. A parent may love a child and derive identity from being needed. Human motives mix. The aim is not purification. It is honesty. Ask of your greatest ambition, what do I believe I will finally feel when this happens? Respected, safe, desired, free, unashamed, visible, loved? Then ask, is there any way to meet part of that need now without abandoning the goal? This is a profound shift. You can pursue wealth without requiring wealth to prove your worth. You can improve your body without hating the body being improved. You can seek recognition without making recognition the oxygen of identity. You can build without using the building to avoid being. The golden ladder does not need to be destroyed, but perhaps you should occasionally climb down. Stand barefoot in the field. Remember the sky was already there. Chapter 7. The Ego and the Keeper of the Story. Few words create more confusion in spiritual conversation than ego. Sometimes ego means arrogance, sometimes selfishness, sometimes the psychological structure that organizes identity, sometimes the illusion of separateness. Different schools use the word differently, so mystical discussions can become vague very quickly. For our purposes, we will use a simple meaning. The ego is the story-making center that says, this is me, this is mine, this happened to me, this is what kind of person I am. It links memory into narrative, it protects continuity, it compares, defends, explains, predicts, it helps you function. Without some stable sense of personal identity, everyday life would be extremely difficult. You need to remember which home is yours, which promises you made, what your values are, who depends on you. The spiritual mistake is to imagine that freedom requires waging war against this structure. A person declares, I must destroy my ego. Who is planning the destruction? Often the ego itself, now wearing spiritual clothing. It begins comparing egolessness. I am less attached than these people. I have transcended materialism. I no longer care about status. I had an awakening. The identity survives by becoming the one who has transcended identity. The mask paints itself transparent. This is why genuine self-inquiry often involves humor. The machinery is clever. You cannot defeat it through hatred because hatred gives it another role. The better approach is observation. The ego is a storyteller. Watch how quickly it writes. Someone does not reply to your message. Fact, there is no reply yet. Story, they are ignoring me. They have lost interest. I said something wrong. People always leave. I am embarrassing. Or perhaps they are disrespectful. I deserve better. I will show them I do not care. Within seconds, a missing message becomes an autobiography. The event is small. The identity machine is vast. This does not mean your interpretation is always wrong. Someone may indeed be ignoring you. The point is that the mind generates meaning faster than we realize. The storyteller hates empty space. It fills silence. It turns ambiguity into certainty. And because identity depends on continuity, it prefers stories that match stories already known. If you believe you are unlovable, you notice rejection. If you believe people cannot be trusted, betrayal becomes especially visible. If you believe you must earn affection, you may feel suspicious when affection arrives freely. The story protects itself. This is not because the mind is malicious. Prediction is useful. Patterns help us survive. But a pattern built from the past can prevent us from meeting the present. You stop seeing the person before you. You see the person through all the people who came before. You stop entering the moment. You enter your interpretation of the moment. The forgotten self lives closer to direct experience. Before, she does not respect me. There is a tightening in the chest. Before, I am failing. There is heat in the face. Before, this always happens. There is disappointment. Before the narrative hardens, there is sensation, emotion, movement, life. Meditative traditions have spent centuries examining this territory. Methods vary widely across Buddhist, Hindu, contemplative Christian, Sufi, Taoist, and other traditions, and their metaphysical claims should not be collapsed into one universal teaching. Yet many practices share an interest in observing thoughts without automatically identifying with them. Modern psychological approaches also sometimes use forms of cognitive distancing or decentering, helping people notice thoughts as mental events rather than unquestionable facts. You do not need to merge spiritual and scientific frameworks to see the practical overlap. A thought can be noticed. This matters. Consider the difference between I am worthless and I am having the thought that I am worthless. The pain may remain, but a fraction of space appears. The statement is no longer the entire sky. It is weather. This space is not denial. You can observe grief and still grieve. Observe anger and still respond. Observe fear and still protect yourself. Awareness does not make you passive. It gives you another degree of freedom. The storyteller becomes most visible when identity is threatened. Someone criticizes your intelligence. Immediately, evidence appears. Achievements, credentials, counter-arguments, memories, or collapse. Maybe I really am stupid. Notice that defense and collapse both keep the same question alive. What does this say about me? What if the criticism could simply be examined? Is it accurate? Partly accurate? Useful? Cruel? Irrelevant? No identity emergency required. This sounds almost impossibly peaceful because most people were taught, directly or indirectly, that selfhood must constantly be defended. But what if the deepest part of you cannot be defended because it cannot be attacked? This is a mystical proposition, not a scientific fact. Many contemplative traditions have suggested some version of it, that beneath the constructed or conditioned identity lies a dimension of being untouched by ordinary gain and loss. Different traditions name this differently. Atman, Buddha nature, spirit, soul, pure awareness, the image of God. Some traditions would disagree profoundly about whether there is any permanent self at all. Buddhist philosophy, for example, is often associated with teachings of anatta or not self, though interpretations differ across schools and scholars. Certain Hindu traditions speak instead of an ultimate self beyond the personal ego. These are not interchangeable doctrines, but both can lead toward a destabilizing question. What you ordinarily call I may not be as simple as it appears. You are aware of your body, aware of memory, aware of thought, aware of identity. Does awareness belong to the story, or does the story appear inside awareness? Do not solve this philosophically yet. Try something quieter. The next time you feel an identity under attack, notice the inner narrator. Listen to its urgency, its arguments, its evidence. Then ask, what if I do not add the next sentence? The mind says they do not respect me. Do not add, because I am weak. Do not add, everyone always does this. Do not add, I need to prove myself. Remain with the raw moment, the body, the breath, the uncertainty. You may discover that an old identity survives partly through narration. It needs repetition. It needs you to tell the story again and again and again. Perhaps the story is true, but even a true story is not the whole of you. You survived something. You are not only a survivor, you failed. You are not failure. You were abandoned. You are not abandonment. You succeeded. You are not success. You have a history. But history is not the same thing as presence. The keeper of the story fears silence, because in silence the borders soften, and something older than biography begins to appear. The museum of former selves. Memory gives you the feeling of continuity. A child runs across a schoolyard. A teenager looks out a car window. A young adult stands nervously at the beginning of a career. An older version of you holds someone's hand in a hospital. Different bodies, different beliefs, different fears. Yet you say, that was me. What connects them? Memory is not a perfect recording. Psychological research shows that memory is reconstructive rather than a literal playback of past experience. Details can change. Interpretations shift. Some events disappear. Others become brighter through repetition. Still, the emotional authority of memory is enormous. You remember being laughed at, so you avoid visibility. You remember rejection, so you expect leaving. You remember praise, so you recreate the performance that earned it. The past becomes instruction. In this sense, identity resembles a museum. Certain memories receive permanent exhibitions. Others remain in storage. Some are illuminated dramatically. Some barely receive a label. Imagine walking through your own museum. In one room, the year I failed. In another, the relationship that broke me. Another, proof that I was never good enough. Another, the time I finally succeeded. Curators decide what deserves attention. So does the mind. Two people can live through similar events and build different identities around them. One says, that experience taught me I can survive uncertainty. Another says, that experience proved that the world is unsafe. Neither interpretation is simply the event itself. They are meanings built around the event. Some meanings protect us, some imprison us, some do both. The forgotten self is not reached by deleting memory. There are things that should be remembered. Injustice should not be spiritually bypassed. Trauma should not be dismissed with simplistic claims that the past is unreal. History matters. Consequences matter. Bodies remember through patterns of response. People may need professional help to work safely with painful experiences. But healing sometimes involves discovering that memory can inform identity without completely defining it. There is an important difference between saying, this happened to me, And this is what I am. The first honors reality. The second turns reality into ontology, into a statement of being. Consider shame. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame often feels closer to, I am something wrong. When shame enters identity, change becomes difficult because behavior is no longer the problem. Existence is. The person does not merely regret a choice, they experience themselves as contaminated, unworthy, fundamentally flawed. Such experiences can have deep psychological roots and may require serious support. But one contemplative move can still be meaningful. Can the feeling of shame itself be observed? Can the sentence I am unworthy be noticed as a sentence? Not denied, not argued away, seen. There is a strange liberation in recognizing that even your most familiar inner voice is a voice. It appears, it speaks, it fades, then perhaps returns. Anything that comes and goes cannot be the totality of what you are. This does not prove the existence of an eternal soul. It does reveal something experiential. Your inner world changes while the capacity to know change persists. Who were you at 10? The answer may produce a photograph. At 15, another image. 25, another. But which is the real you? The frightened one, the ambitious one, the wounded one, the joyful one, the confused one, the one who believed things you now reject? If you choose one version as authentic and condemn all others as false, you create another rigid identity. Perhaps you have never been one fixed thing. Perhaps selfhood is more like a river than a statue. Ancient philosophy used the river as an image of change long before modern psychology. The Greek thinker Heraclitus is traditionally associated with the idea that one cannot step into the same river in exactly the same way because both the river and the person are changing. The precise wording commonly attributed to ancient figures is not always preserved exactly as popular culture repeats it, but the image remains powerful. A river has identity without stillness. We call it one river even though the water is continually moving. Could a human self be similar? Continuity without rigidity, pattern without permanence, a recognizable form through which life moves. If so, the forgotten self may not be a hidden statue buried under years of conditioning. It may be the river itself, the living movement before you froze it into descriptions. This changes the question. Instead of, who was I before the world changed me? Perhaps, what in me is still capable of changing? The museum becomes less sacred. You can walk through it without moving in. You can visit the room of grief, the room of humiliation, the room of triumph, the room of innocence. You can place a hand against the glass. You can say, yes, that was part of my life. Then keep walking. At the far end of the museum is a door. No sign hangs above it. It leads outside. The light there is so bright that for a moment you cannot see. There are no exhibits, no labels, no archived versions of yourself. Only weather, breath, the unfinished day, and the terrifying freedom of not yet knowing what you will become. Chapter 9, The Life You Perform in Secret. There is a public performance everyone recognizes. Then there is a private performance no one sees. You can perform even alone. You can sit in an empty room and still be playing a role, the productive person, the disciplined person, the spiritual person, the victim, the genius, the failure, the person who has no needs, the person who must always be improving. This is because the audience has been internalized. You no longer need someone watching. You have learned how to watch yourself. This inner observer can become relentless. You eat and evaluate the meal morally, good, bad, disciplined, weak. You rest and monitor whether the rest is deserved. You meditate and evaluate whether you are meditating well. You read and wonder whether the reading is useful. You exercise and judge the body. You make love and wonder how you appear. You mourn and wonder whether you should be over it. Even solitude becomes supervised. What would it mean to be alone without monitoring yourself? For many people, this is almost unimaginable. Try sitting for 10 minutes without doing anything useful. No phone, no book, no meditation technique, no music, no attempt to become calmer. Simply sit. Soon the inner manager arrives. This is a waste of time. Then the entertainer. This is boring. Then the critic. You are doing this wrong. Then the planner. You should use this time to think about tomorrow. A whole committee appears. Who appointed them? Most people never ask. We assume the voices are us because they speak in first person, but language is inherited. Standards are inherited. Even many private desires are shaped through contact with other minds. The inner world is crowded. The forgotten self becomes difficult to hear, not because it disappeared, but because everyone else moved in. Parents, teachers, partners, former partners, religious authorities, cultural ideals, advertising, algorithms, friends, enemies, past versions of you, all speaking. Do more, be less, hurry, improve, prove, hide, win. Forgive, never forget, settle down, break free, stand out, be yourself, but be the right kind of yourself. In some contemplative traditions, silence is treated not merely as the absence of sound, but as a condition in which habitual mental activity can be witnessed more clearly. Silence does not always feel peaceful. At first, it may feel noisy. When external stimulation decreases, internal material becomes easier to notice. This is one reason people can find meditation uncomfortable. Stillness removes distraction. The buried conversation becomes audible. This can include ordinary restlessness, but it can also uncover painful emotions. Anyone with significant trauma or mental health difficulties may need approaches adapted to their needs rather than forcing prolonged silence. The romantic image of the serene meditator hides an important truth. Silence often begins as confrontation. You meet the mind you have been escaping. You discover how many thoughts repeat, how much imaginary dialogue occurs, how often you defend yourself before invisible people, how many future conversations you rehearse, how much energy is spent maintaining identity. Then occasionally a gap appears. A bird sounds outside, air moves against your skin. There is no commentary for perhaps half a second, only experience. Then the mind returns. That was peaceful. The gap becomes a story. Still, something was revealed. Consciousness does not require constant narration in order for experience to occur. The tree exists before you name it. Sound reaches you before you interpret it. The body breathes without consulting your biography. There is a level of living that does not need a story about who you are. This is where mystical language begins to emerge. Some traditions speak of presence, not presence as a productivity tool, not being present so you can perform better. Presence as naked participation in reality before the mind divides everything into usefulness. A cup is warm, light rests on the wall. Breath enters, breath leaves. For a moment, there is no successful person drinking tea, no wounded person, no spiritual seeker, no failure, no future. There is simply drinking. This simplicity is difficult because the ego survives partly through time. It gathers the past, projects the future, constructs continuity. Presence temporarily loosens both. The past is memory happening now. The future is imagination happening now. This does not mean past and future are unimportant. It means they are experienced through present mental activity. When that activity quiets even briefly, the ordinary self loses some of its density. You do not vanish. Instead, experience becomes strangely intimate. You may notice that you feel more real when you are not thinking about yourself. Consider the moments when you have been deeply absorbed. Music, athletics, art, conversation, nature, love, emergency, craft, children, prayer. Sometimes self-consciousness disappears. Later you say, I lost myself. Yet the experience may have felt more alive than ordinary life. What exactly was lost? Not consciousness, not responsiveness. What disappeared was the constant commentary of the self-image. Perhaps some of our deepest experiences are not experiences of finding ourselves. They are experiences of temporarily forgetting the one we thought we had to be. Chapter 10. The child beneath the photograph. People often say they want to return to who they were as a child. There is beauty in the longing. But childhood should not be turned into mythology. Children can be playful, curious, spontaneous, and direct. They can also be fearful, possessive, cruel, anxious, dependent, and confused. Childhood is not automatically pure. Still, something happens when you look at an old photograph of yourself. Perhaps you are 5, missing teeth, hair untidy. You are holding a plastic dinosaur or standing in a garden or laughing at something outside the frame. You know things about that child that the child does not know. You know heartbreak is coming. You know embarrassment is coming. You know certain people will leave. You know some dreams will disappear. You know the body will change. You know the child will eventually stand before mirrors and judge what is seen. The photograph becomes almost unbearable because the child seems to exist before the verdicts, before all of them, at least. You want to reach into the image, Tell the child something. What would you say? Be careful. You might immediately begin giving instructions. Work less. Choose differently. Do not trust that person. Believe in yourself. You could accidentally become another adult telling the child how to live. What if you said nothing? What if you simply sat beside them? Let them show you the